From all the way back in August of 2017, Russ and I were one day, we got asked to explain how IPv4 works. So we did. It was pretty fun. I know for some of you it would be way basic, but it might be something useful to other people. So from a blast from the past, SDL number 26.
This is a Security Weekly production for security professionals by security professionals. Please visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to all the shows on our network.
From the Security Weekly Vault, it's the show that keeps you up to date on the latest security news twice a week. Your trusted source for accurate security information and expert analysis. It's time for the Security Weekly News. Hi. This episode brought to you by Rogers Shrubbery Service, just in case you were wondering if you're familiar with that. Russ came back to join us this week, finally, after being off on the road, traveling the wilds of Las Vegas. Coming up, this week, Black Hat is going on in Las Vegas, where it's 110 degrees Fahrenheit, for those of you who still use those outdated systems. It's DEF CON coming up, and if you've been following that, there's all kinds of cool stuff there, like the Hacking Village, where they're hacking election machines, I guess, is one of the challenges. Yeah, exactly, relevant. Got all that stuff going on. Wild West Hackin' Fest. That's coming up. We're going to be at Wild West Hackin' Fest in Deadwood, South Dakota, the beautiful sunny Deadwood, South Dakota, in October. So it's on October 25th through the 28th. Yeah. And they have training there, too, if you aren't familiar with that. And they were just posting some of the trainings that they're going to have. So check it out, because their training is cheap compared to a lot of other stuff. Yeah. And it was really like top-notch people. So if you want to come to South Dakota, have some fun, Russ is going to try to fly his drone up Washington's nose or something like that. So we'll probably be in federal prison by the time it starts, which wouldn't surprise me, or Guantanamo Bay, or one of those other fun places that they send people to get you to confess. And after today's episode, we're probably going to be in big trouble anyway. So all those coming up. DerbyCon is in September, so I know that the Security Weekly people will be at that, and I presume that's in Louisville, Kentucky. So we don't have an ad for that yet, but we'll get one real soon. So today we want to talk about IP addressing a bit, and this some of this started. We've been talking about IP and binary and hex and all these kind of things on the show, and I got this thing this morning. So it's a secret FBI document number 5. And it actually says I can release this to members of my own organization and with clients or customers who need to know the information to protect themselves. So I presume I'm going to count you as my clients and customers. So
need to know.
And need to know. Yeah. So I don't know why, but I was just going to tell you about this. This is from InfraGard. So if you're not a member of InfraGard, you might consider it. It's a free program you can join. And you have to do a background check and all this stuff, but it gets you on these mailing lists from the FBI Center, so you actually get all this FBI flash traffic on your InfraGard site. This one, and the only thing I'm really going to tell you about is the headline of this article that came out this morning was IP addresses and domains used by likely Iran-based cyber actors to attack victims worldwide. And this is relevant to us because basically what they're doing here is they're releasing lists of IP ranges and specific IPs that you might want to blacklist on your firewall. And at home, you don't really have this problem because you probably, by default, are blocking everything coming inbound. But if you're not, these are IP addresses that have been published as blacklisted type IPs. And when I get these things, I usually go in and add those networks to my blacklist of people that I don't allow to talk to me at all. And these were running spear phishing attacks, which we've talked about on the show, social engineering attacks, so I don't know how those are using IP addresses, but maybe somehow, and malicious website type attacks that were being run against a whole variety of people, including academic institutions, end users, and corporate and infrastructure. So these were just addresses that I don't know how they identified it. They have a whole article here that goes on for pages, but they never really tell you how these were determined. But they do give you the whole list. I actually added like 6 Class C networks. So we talked about that last week. If you don't know what that means. to my blacklist today just to block all these address structures out because I don't have anybody coming from there that needs to be in my network. So I'm just blocking those guys off. How was Vegas, Russ?
Vegas was fun. I went to an ed tech conference and had a really good time. Gambled a little bit and ate some fantastic food. Went to my favorite all-you-can-eat sushi restaurant. So.
Well, there you go.
Yeah.
It sounds like fun. It would probably be better if you stayed for DEF CON.
Well, yeah, it would have been cool, but I don't think my discretionary fund would have allowed me to stay. I didn't win anything, in other words.
Well, yeah, I haven't been to DEF CON in a while. I used to go to DEF CON, but I haven't been in a few years. So maybe next time. Who knows?
That'd be fun, yeah.
But like I said, we'll be going to Wild West Hackin' Fest, so we'll have some fun with that. Yeah. One of the things that we wanted to talk to you about was DNS. And DNS stands for Domain Name Service. And this is one of these pieces of IP and TCP and IP addressing that's kind of important because it really ends up being the sort of quintessential piece of how the internet works, because otherwise you'd have to remember 32-bit IP addresses all the time.
Instead of eBay.com, you'd have to know eBay's,
or
IP.
CNN.com or whatever it is, 178.20.31.65. Yep. And DNS is a common thing that not many people really know how it works and all this kind of stuff. Basically what DNS does is you take what is called an A record. And an A record allows you to, in DNS, assign an IP address to a name that you theoretically own. So you have to go buy these things, which are called domains or fully qualified domains.
FQDN,
and those FQDN, fully qualified domain names, are available for purchase, so you can go on websites and try to buy them if somebody else doesn't own them. In fact, just yesterday, I got an article from Snopes. And if you don't know what Snopes.com is, go check it out. Snopes.com is one of the best websites there is. They debunk ridiculous nonsense that people put up, like that the Earth is flat. If you're a flat earther, please just go away.
The guy who took a level on the airplane.
Yeah, like, look, it's not changing. I'm like, oh, wow. I think I can prove just about anything using this kind of logic. And other circular logic nonsense, or just plain old fake, a lot of the memes that you see on the internet that are just continual and they come up all the time, like, so-and-so is dead.
Yeah, somebody died last week.
Yeah, there's that whole thing about Richard Gere.
Oh,
And he denies it vehemently, but...
I should hope so. I mean,
well, I don't know. I think you should embrace it and be like the face of... Well, we won't get into that. The bottom... Not the face even, but regardless, DNS ends up being the whole piece of this, and buying domain names is something a lot of people do. If you watch Security Weekly, you see we buy domain names all the time when people make up funny ones, and I go out and license them. Like one of my favorites that I own is goatgrabber.com, which was literally just a non sequitur. I was at this thing with my daughter and one of her friends, and we had to write something down on this whiteboard. It was like people were leaving comments, and I was trying to think of something to write, and the only thing I could think, I wrote, "I am the goat grabber," and which I thought that'll pique people's interest later and wonder what this is.
That's what I am the walrus was going to be, but thank God,
but it was I am the goat grabber is almost the same thing.
Yeah.
All that expands into stuff like Punycode, which is where people take domains and they buy domains with like weird non-standard symbols in them, like A's with umlauts over them or O's with slashes through them. And when they print on your web browser, they actually look like that domain. So if you buy Apple, A-P-P-L-E, and then the A's got umlauts over it, the E's got umlauts over it, it actually, when you see it in the browser, it says apple.com, and that all turns into phishing attacks and things like that. So people trying to redirect you to apple.com, but it's really apple or whatever it is .com, and it becomes a bit of a problem. So if you want to buy domains, that's a fun thing to do. People gamble on this. They hope they can, if you got lucky and you bought some of the really nasty words that people want to use for porn sites, or one big places people jump into DNS is for politicians. And one of the first kind of consults I ever got from Washington was somebody asking me how DNS worked and how did they acquire these names, because they wanted to buy all possible variations of their guy that was going to run for a Senate seat later, like Rob Davis sucks.com.
They want to buy them all. So
they want to buy all
those.
And they actually were like, can you think up some more? And I was like, I can think of all kinds of things. I'm not using the real name either. Rob Davis sucks. That's an easy one. But add, that kind of stuff. So what happens with IP addresses is if you put up a server somewhere, whether it's in the cloud or you put it up on your own or even at home, you have a public IP address. And if you remember my show last week, I talked about the difference in public and private addresses. So you would have that public IP, and those are called static IPs. And if you want one, you can buy one from your provider. So even if you're at home, I have one, and you can call your ISP and say, I would like a static IP, and they'll tell you how much that costs, and then you pay them some fee, and they will give you a static IP. That would then get entered into DNS, and the DNS host, whether it was Google, so theirs is 8.8.8.8, or if it was some other, Amazon has a DNS host, or you have your own DNS host, which also then requires a static IP, you could put that name into the DNS and put robdavissucks.com in there, and you equate it to that 4-octet IP address that we talked about on last week's show, and that would allow any traffic out on the internet, and it propagates. So these DNS servers share information. And today, it usually, if I put one in Amazon, which is I use for DNS, if you put one in there, it literally takes just like seconds before it is propagated across the earth. In the old days, even just 4 or 5 years ago, I would put them in, and sometimes it would be 24 hours before people were being able to hit that.
Or you have to manually flush the cache, the DNS cache.
Well, yeah, they have that, and that's another whole set of problems. Do you have a lot of DNS stuff?
I don't run my own DNS server. When I had a business, I used to set one up using Windows of all things. But anyway, be that as it may, it was. But now I just, like most of us, I think in residential, we latch onto our IP provider.
Well, the most famous one is called BinD, and BinD is a daemon that is an old Unix DNS server, and so BinD is something that you'll hear people talk about. It was famous for having a lot of exploits. So if you didn't have it patched and so forth, because it had been around for so long, they've obviously patched it and there's newer versions, but hackers love to find old BinD daemons that are out there running that somebody put up 12, 15 years ago, never patched it, and it's just sitting there running. So if you need to do those kind of things, there's a couple of ways you can get into that, whether it's with Amazon. So AWS has their whole DNS service. You can buy basically DNS space on Amazon. Your provider may have DNS for you, or you can roll your own and put those up on your static IPs and run them. So like we do all that. If you do Active Directory and all these kind of back office things, you're pretty familiar with DNS, because Active Directory requires local DNS, and that may or may not propagate out into the world. All that stuff is done with private addressing, like we talked about last time, and then that gets pushed out into the world with some kind of version of NAT or PAT or SNAT or something that you might want to use. You have any other DNS comments? No, that's about it. Yeah.
I could talk, in terms of, how I introduced it to students at entry level. I was telling Doug before the show, I used to compare it to the white pages, the books that you used to get that were delivered to your doorstep. But then, considering some of our students, are 18, 20, 21, they don't know what that is. I'm like, oh, you don't know what a phone book is? Okay, well, think about this. Well, how do you find numbers for businesses that you don't know, and so on and so forth? So DNS is kind of like the white pages, if you will.
And there's a couple more things I would add to. I mean, he's right. When he first said white and yellow pages, I was like, what? What is that? And I hadn't thought about it in so long. I mean, there used to be a time when you walked around looking for pay phones that still had a phone directory hanging on the pay phones, and nobody torn the pages out of or whatever. And then all that's gone, and nobody even knows what it is anymore. The other piece of that is ways you can find out IP addresses from this, and vice versa. The most easy way to find out an IP address of something is to ping it. So if you go to your command line and type the word ping, whether it's Windows or Mac or Linux or anything, if you type ping and put the name like CNN.com or Rod Davis Sucks or whatever, if you'll watch immediately on the screen, you will see in parentheses the actual IP address that comes back from that. Now, a lot of them have floating IPs, so like CNN or anybody with a big site, Amazon, their IPs change based on where you're located, so it attempts to find you, which means if you're using a VPN, you may have the address will change depending on what VPN you're connected to and all kinds of things like that. So it's a pretty interesting field. This is one of those first things people learn when they get involved in hacking and security, because this is sort of the underpinnings of all this and how it actually works. That all leads into things like DNS poisonings, which we'll do a show about that kind of stuff some other time. But that was just sort of that's one of the pieces of IP addressing that's pretty important for people to at least have a vague understanding of. A second one is DHCP. And DHCP is another thing that you use all the time that you may not know what it is or how it works. And it stands for Dynamic Host Control Protocol, right?
I know it's configuration protocol, but it could be control.
Like somebody has to be a wise guy. Okay. Russ. But most people call it DHCP if you're one of the common people and you're not an elite ivory tower type with your acronyms and all that.
Oh, boy.
Yeah, it's like, nah, yeah, okay. But DHCP is something you use all the time, and what it does is it actually allows you to get an IP address on your local network without having it pre-configured. So what happens is the DHCPD daemon, which is another piece of a tool that you might have running in Linux or in Active Directory or something on a server.
Or in your router.
Or your little home router has got DHCPD running on it. What happens when you turn your computer on or your phone connects or anything else, it sends out a request and it says, hi, I'm here. And DHCPD says, oh, I see you. And it takes the MAC address, which is a layer 2 protocol we've talked about a little bit before, and we'll talk about again someday. But it takes that piece of the layer 2 protocol and it boosts it up, and it makes a table, which is called an ARP table, and it equates IP addresses from a pool that somebody set up, and on the home routers it's just sort of preset, and it assigns you one of those addresses from the pool, the next one in the pool. When you connect your router to Cox or Verizon or anybody like that, there's DHCP running on the outside as well, and you'll see your device pull another address out of their pool that they're assigning, so you've got one on either side of the world. Most of those are going to be private addresses, so the most common ones you see at home are going to be like 192.168.0. something, 192.168.1. something, because a lot of old networking people don't like zeros.
Yeah.
They're valid, but a lot of old networking equipment would not accept zeros in the addresses, and so therefore you would not see people using them, but the home devices often do. That's the most common one that I see.
And they don't like 255 either. I mean, you know.
Well, you can't. Yeah, you don't want to use the broadcast. So when you look at IP addresses, the first address in a network segment. And we're going to talk. I told you we're going to talk about subnet masks real soon. I got to get up my nerve. It's like jumping off a cliff. You have to kind of stand there for a while and take a few deep breaths before you go. Okay, now we will talk. I know I said last week we'd talk about it, but then I chickened out. I went back to the base camp and said, no, not this year. but we will talk about it real soon. But the first address in a network sequence and the last address are kind of reserved. The first address in Cisco is called the network address, and they won't let you use it on Cisco. The last address is called the broadcast address, and when you send something to the broadcast address, it's sent to everyone in the network. So a lot of times you have those not being used, and it's not a good idea to use them, by the way, because old equipment won't work with a network address. Cisco won't let you use a network address, and if you assign someone to broadcast, everything they do is kind of being sent to everyone in the whole network segment, which gets you back to really old networking stuff that's a problem. But DHCP lets people set this up. Now, you can do this at home. You can actually go in your router at home and set a DHCP range. So you could go in there and say, I would rather not use these defaults. And now, I don't know how dangerous it really is to use the defaults because, it's all private addressing structures. But if you'd like to use a private addressing structure like 10, like we talked about last week, you could certainly go in there and change all that, and all your devices will update as soon as they request a new address. And a common outcome of this is, well, what if I don't want to pay for static? Have you ever worked with that?
I have. I leased a static IP from Cox for 2.5 years to run a radio station.
Yeah, but if you don't want that, there's a way around it.
No, I don't know. How?
Well, there's a way around it. Yeah, you can cheat. One, you can use what hackers do, which is knowing the protocol. So DHCP, the way it works is it assigns the most recently released address to you. It doesn't go to the next one in a sequence. So if your device requests a new one, it will usually get the one it had back. So a lot of home users have that outside address on their DHCP, and it never changes. Every time the lease runs out, it just requests it, and it's so quick that the new one is the same as the old one. Yeah. I had one for 3 years, and it never changed. When you'll lose it is when the power goes out, and then they have to reboot everything, and then all of a sudden everybody's requesting IP addresses, and it changes. The other way to do this is called DYNDNS, DYNDNS.org. And if you go to DYNDNS.org, and your router supports it, which most home routers do now, what you can do is you can go to DYNDNS and register a domain and assign it to a dynamic IP address. That's a DHCP issued one. And basically what happens on that then is your router will constantly check and update DIN DNS. And so they talk to each other and they update it, and you can do that. Today, however, the ISPs don't like you to do that.
Yeah, of course not.
And they don't want you putting up static things and servers on their network. Right. They want you to pay them for static. So what they do typically, if you look at the outside of your router, if you have a private address, this isn't going to work for you because you won't know what the public address is and you can't update it. So if it's a 10, it's a 192 or whatever on the outside, and they're usually 10s. So if you get Cox or Verizon, it's usually a 10 address. Then it's not going to work, and you have to pay them for a static IP address. But you can call them up and get static IPs. You have any other DHCP stories?
No, I mean I know Cox was running for a while 64.128, as the first two,
right?
So that would have worked for me.
Well, yeah, when they were doing that, it would work fine. Yeah. But now that they typically have private addressing structures, you're actually going through multiple layers to get out to a public space. So you're still in a private network where you're connected. I know mine now is a private address on the inside, so getting out is kind of a trick. But you can always check those things out. You can use various tools, and we can talk about those. If you want to know about it, you should write a comment and tell us. Trace route or any of those kind of tools that we could talk about on the show, or in maps, or any of that kind of stuff, or Wireshark, which is a good one to learn. Yeah. Check out Cybrary if you haven't looked there. They have great free videos about all that stuff too if you want to learn how to use any of those tools. I think Cybrary has BIN-D, they have DHCPD, they have addressing, they have how to use Wireshark. They have all kinds of lessons you can get for free, which, I mean, you can't beat that.
Great, no.
So just check out Cybrary. If you don't know how to get to it, tweet at me or post a comment, and we'll list it on there, and you can check it out. The last thing I'm going to talk about is about spoofing. And spoofing is something that people have been doing for as long as there's been IP addresses. And spoof is a term that hackers use to describe when you use an illegitimate IP address on a piece of equipment that you have. And you will see a lot of people spoofing their address. Now, so here's a couple things. If you spoof your address, it's very possible that you will not be able to get replies. Mm-hmm. So if you have a fake IP address, it's kind of like having a fake phone number. You can call out, but you can't hear the reply. So it means nobody's talking back to you. So I guess you could call people with like the number and just read stuff at them, but you're not going to hear what they have to say. Same thing on your network. So you could actually connect to a website, but you couldn't get the actual website back because the traffic is being sent somewhere else. And the reason people used to spoof, the first time I spoofed something was the ISP I had. This was in '99. The ISP told me that I could only connect one device to their network.
Oh, I remember that back in the day.
And I put when the guy came to set it up, I was like, "Oh, we're going to get broadband. Oh, it's so great. It's awesome." And he was like, "What's that thing?" And I was like, "Oh, that? Oh, it's a toaster." And he was
Pay
like,
no attention to
He's like, "That looks like a Cisco router." And I was like, "Oh, yeah, but we just use it as a doorstop. We would never connect it to your ISP. That would be wrong." And he said, "Well, you better not. You have to pay for every single device." And so what I did was they actually took the IP address of a PC in our house and assigned that into their system. And that was the only thing that would work. So then I immediately went on the router, spoofed the IP address to be the same as the one they had set up, and then I could get my router on there.
Then they got crafty and then did MAC address binding for that specific
And then you
IP.
have to spoof your MAC address.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And they got crafty on me, and they started monitoring how much bandwidth I was using.
They did that as well. Yeah.
Yeah, because for a little while I put up an antenna and I was selling broadband to my neighbors.
Of course you were. That's
and they were
awesome.
like, "Why is your bandwidth used so high?" I was like, "I watch a lot of porn." And they were sort of checking that out, and they were like, "I think you might be actually selling bandwidth." And I was like, "No, man, it's just porn. I'm running like 19 screens at once. It's crazy down here." But yeah, then they were going to inspect my network, and I took it all down and hooked up like a really old Dell laptop. It was like, "No, there it is. I said, see there? That's my porn. I call him Little Porny." And that was it. And, that was the whole thing. But I mean, that's kind of the stuff that people do. And these kind of spoofing attacks lead to one last topic I'm gonna introduce you to, which is called a zombie or a Smurf attack. And what these attacks do is people in a Smurf attack, they've spoofed the IP, and then they send a flood of packets to somewhere else that's innocent, or a lot of somethings. And that the replies go to the source address, and so like people will bounce these attacks that don't do this stuff. It's illegal. In the United States, it's illegal under there's a couple of different laws at the federal level that make them able to prosecute you for doing stuff that we used to do all the time. But it's like people would literally set these up, and they would send spoofed packets over to somebody, and then that would bounce back at the actual victim. So when the victim was looking at who was attacking them, what they were actually seeing was this is all seems to be coming from the FBI.
Yeah, that's cool.
You know, and that got then of course that got people in trouble when they were bouncing traffic off the FBI or the White House or stuff like that. And then they got investigated, and then these Secret Service people are coming to your house and things like that and knocking on the door, and they don't have a sense of humor at all. Especially the Secret Service. You know who you are too, because they never laugh. I used to have them in class, and they would never laugh. No matter what I said, the Secret Service people would be sitting there like this. Sometimes they would do this then. But they never laughed no matter what you did. And it was kind of a challenge, too.
Yeah.
But anyway, that was our sort of our interim hiatus week while everybody here is like so quiet in here. And poor Riley is next door trying to keep everything afloat. So he's doing
a good job.
He is. He's doing a great job considering that, he only has 2 hands and 2 feet. He had to take his shoes off this week. So he's running 4 boards at once, which is quite impressive.
Yep, definitely.
And, but he's doing a great job because everybody else is at DEF CON out there having fun in Las Vegas. And, Mark, I don't want to know what you're going to come home with, but they can't cure some of that stuff these days. So be sure and tune in next week when we may get up our nerve to get back to the subnetting, or we talk about something else. And remember, in 2 weeks, we're going to be talking with Congressman Jim Langevin on our show about federal law. He is the head of the Congressional Cyber Caucus. Thanks for watching. We'll see you real soon. Bye, Shrubs.